command line arguments. So what are command line arguments? So many times when you're writing scripting, especially, right? So you don't really run it directly, which means there will be some values that you will be passing to it, so that in the runtime, these values will be used within the program or within the scripting, and you will be storing the data, and based on that, you will be working. So those kind of values which we pass to the script or the program is what we call it as arguments or parameters. So in the same way, any values that you can pass to the Perl will also be considered as a command line arguments, because when you are invoking something, you will be passing a value, right? Say for example, until now I used to call something like this, right? But along with this, if you want, you can pass an argument. You can pass how many ever argument you want by space separated. So like this, you can pass many arguments by a space separated between them. Now, by passing these values, how is it the Perl going to take inside the script while it is running is what important. So any value that you're passing to the Perl through runtime will be stored in a special array called argv. Okay, so what all these values, whatever that you're passing to the Perl, will be stored in a special array called argv. Now, argv is a special array which Perl creates during the runtime, and these values that you are passing will be stored into it. Okay, so this will be like this. Whatever values you are passing, it will be storing it like this. But remember, this is a runtime generated array, and it will not be available within your script because it is a special array which Perl understands only if you pass a argument while you are calling a Perl script. Okay, now when I say that you are passing an argument and these values will be stored into a special array called argv. Now we know that anything that you pass into an array can easily be retrieved, right? So now for example here I am passing two values. Okay, so to give an example, I can say arg1, arg2. Okay, so these are the two values that are passing. Then what will be the actual value of argv? It will contain like this: arg1, arg2, right? So there will be two values stored into the array. Now, how do I take the values of this array? Because I know that anything that we store into an array will always have an index number, where the index of this will be 0, right? And then the index of this will be 1. So now, how do we get the value from this? So it's the same way. If you want the first index value, then it is a scalar variable because it is a single value that you're trying to retrieve, right? So you'll simply say dollar $RGV, and in the square bracket you will say 0. Now if you say this, this will point to the value arg1. In the same way, if you want the next value, then simply you will say dollar $RGV of 1, and this will get us argument 2. Getting it? So like this, any values that you're passing to the Perl script can be stored as by default by the Perl through this special array called argv. So remember, this is a special array, and since it's an array, we know that we can easily retrieve from it any point of time using this standard index number. Okay, so let us try to see an example and see how exactly you can get it. Okay, now we need to pass a argument, right? So simply what I'll do is, now let me show you what it is. So I'll say print argv, okay, and here, so here I'm going to call phi.pl and I'll pass a value like this. Okay, I'm just giving some value. So see what it does. It exactly prints it, because any value that you're passing to the Perl as in command line argument or a parameter will be stored into this special array called argv. And now if you want, we know that it contains two values because I'm passing two values. So you can directly use the index number to get its specific value. So suppose if I want the first value, then if I say print first argument value is $argv, okay, okay. So now let's try to run. I'll change it. Apple orange. So now if you see, so the total values in the argv array is these two, wherein the first index or the first element of the array argv is apple, and that's what it's printing, and the next value that you have is orange. Now anything that you can apply to an array holds good to this @gv, but the only difference is that this is a special array wherein we are not creating it, we are initializing it through command prompt, and Perl takes care of it. So any regular Perl thing that you can, I mean the array that you can handle through the Perl can also be applied. So for instance, if you want to know the number of elements that is available, then still we know that how is that we can do. So what will this do? So if I say $hash of an array, it will give me the total number of elements present in the array, right? But it will always give us the value one lesser than the total because the number begins with 0. So always we have to do a +1 to it. So now if you see print number of arguments passed is how much? $num. Okay, so now if I pass this, you will get 2. So the same thing if I pass, you'll get 3. Okay, so this is how when you pass an argument, you can store it as part of this special array called argv, and you can make use of it. Getting it? What is a command line argument? It is nothing but the values that you pass will be stored into a special array called argv, that is argv at the rate. And since it's in special array, any specifications that you put for a normal array holds good for this also. So you can use it like a normal array and retrieve it. But the only difference is we are not initializing within the Perl, but when we are passing the values to the Perl, it will automatically assign the values. Getting it?
Yeah, yeah, getting it.
Okay. Now, so why is the command line arguments used? So many time when you're writing the script, right, you need to validate couple of things. You don't want always the user to pass a value, because one of the last example that I asked you guys to practice is, ask the user to enter a value. Now if you do that, every time when the user has to enter a value, it will be waiting for him at some point of time if you put a stdin, right? So instead of that, you can make this way. So it is easy that the user, when he's invoking the script, he just has to pass the value, and that can always be taken. Because when you are doing automation, it will not be good if it is waiting for a user to enter a value. Because say I need to run a script every half an hour and it needs a value from the user. How it will happen if you put a stdin, because it will just stuck there, and unless and until user don't press the value and enter, it will never go forward. So instead of that, if you are passing it through command line argument, it will be easy, wherein any value that you want to pass, you can just pass it on the command prompt instead of asking from the user directly. So that's one of the major use on why we will be using command line arguments. Okay, now coming to the next topic, which is again one of the important topic called subroutines, or simply we call it as functions. Now in any kind of programming language, what is the most important thing is to reuse the code, right? So when I say reuse the code, how is that you're going to reuse some code which you have written? Say you would have written some script or program for some specific purpose, but for some another purpose you want to reuse the same thing. Now how is that you're going to do? Say you are it's not something specifically wherein you are repeating, but only for some use case you need to run it. Say you are taking some database and you're trying to retrieve some details about a user, and now after some time you are using the same details to check for another employee from the database. So that means you are going to write the same kind of code for both the persons, right? So in that case, what you can do is, rather than writing lengthier code which is going to have same functionality, and if you know that it can always be reused, then you put it as a subroutine. Or subroutine is nothing but a group of statements, okay, wherein it is aligned specifically, and whenever you want to call that group of statement, you call the subroutine, so that subroutine will call all the program which is, I mean, all the line of codes or statements which is put inside it will be getting executed. So this way the code looks very neat and it will be easy to understand. So you don't have to write everything from top to down. So you segregate it separately, like you make them as a group. So for this task I will create one subroutine or function. For this task I'll create another subroutine. So that way what will happen is, literally it will be looking good, and it's also easy for anyone to debug something. And the final thing is, if there is any replication or reuse of data, you can always use the subroutine. So that is why as a programming or as a scripting, it's always a best practice to use subroutines. Okay, so whatever that we are practicing is quite simple, but as you keep making the program little more meaningful and for the real production, then you have to do a lot of things. So you don't write everything from line 1 to line 100. Everything will be grouped, and that grouped will be created as a subroutine. And now, how does that subroutine look? So, subroutine means it's not something huge that you have to do. So, all you have to do is you have to declare a subroutine first, because when you are writing the code, you have to write it inside the subroutine. And for doing it, first you will have to have a declaration wherein you will say sub, which represents that it is a subroutine, followed by a name. You can give any string that represents the subroutine, and then you open a flower bracket and close the flower bracket, and all the line of statements or the code that you want to put inside the subroutine, you will be putting it here. Okay, and now what you're doing here is only declaring or defining. That means Perl will not use it unless and until you call. Okay, it's like you are writing it and you're just keeping it. That's it. Even though the declaration of this will be within the same script, Perl will not be executing these lines unless and until you invoke. So, in order to invoke, all you have to do is just simply say the name of the subroutine what you have given. Okay, and if you have any arguments you can pass. If not, if you just say the name of the subroutine and followed by brackets, it will call the subroutine. So what will happen if it is calling? So wherever that you are calling, at that point of time it will go inside to the subroutine, and whatever line of code or statements that you have written will get executed. Okay, so it is like if I call this subroutine two times somewhere else, then wherever you are calling at that place, the Perl will go to the declaration part, and then whatever that you have executed, I mean, whatever that you have kept inside it will get executed. So this way, you will call the subroutine only when it is needed and you can reuse it. Okay, so I just try to write the same example whatever that we saw so far using the subroutine, and let's see how it works. Okay, so before that, let me just write one simple subroutine to show how it works. Okay, so now for example, okay, so I have the same value, right? Now what I'll do is let me create a subroutine. Okay, so I'll say subroutine test, open the flower bracket, and we'll close all of them together in this. So what I've done is I've just created a subroutine called test, and I've put all these things together. Okay, and now let's see the difference. So if I say print end of script, so when I run, see what happens. Okay, I might be passing some values. So nothing gets happened because it is directly printing only the end of script. The reason here is whatever that you have given here is just the defining or definition part. You are not still using it. So for a subroutine, if you declare, that doesn't mean that Perl will just come and call it. Unless and until you are invoking the subroutine, it will never call. Okay, so how do you invoke? So for invoking, all you have to do is give the name of the subroutine with the brackets and close. So wherever you call, so Perl, what it will do now, it will come here. You are declaring something, so it will just read it. It will not run. Then it will come here. When it is coming here, you are saying that, okay, run this test subroutine. So when you are seeing it, then at this point, it will go back to this. Whatever that you have given is this values. So it will take all this and it will execute one by one. When it is completed, it will once again come here and then start going further with whatever rests that you have in the Perl. Okay, see the difference. So now you see, first it gets executed all those things and then it comes to the end. Now the same thing wherever you call. Suppose if I want, I can call it once again. Okay, so after the print of this line, I'm going to call it once again. So see what happens. So wherever you call, it will start executing at that particular place. That means here, once again, after completing this, you're calling the subroutine. So at this place, the handle will once again go to the definition part. And from here, it will start executing all this line. And once it is done, the execution will come back to this line. And then if you see there is nothing further to proceed, so it will stop here. So that is why subroutines are something wherein you call it only when you need, but you will group all the requires that specifications that you need, and you will be invoking it only when some need is there. Now, when you do, as I said, there might be many requirements wherein you don't have to just pass it. Now, what we did is this is a simple program just to show. But now, if you have to do some kind of calculation, you need to pass some values to the subroutine also. Now, it is not mandatory that you have to write something without passing any values. Many times you might have to pass some value specific to it. Now, what could be an example for that? Now, the example is, say you are writing some specific program for some addition and subtraction of some number. Okay, so if you're writing some application for addition and subtraction, what is that you need to do now? Now we need to pass two values, or we need two values, and using that two values we will be trying to write some code, right? So let's do that now. So what I'm going to try now is I'm going to write a program wherein it will ask me to enter two numbers, and if I say I have to add, then it will do the addition, and if I say do subtract, it will do the subtraction. Okay, so so before writing it, how can we write? So what my requirement is, I need to do a addition or subtraction based on what users tell me, and if the user says add, then I have to do addition, and if the user says subtract, I need to do a subtraction. And for doing both, one common thing that I have to do is I have to get the value from the user. Okay, so in that case what I can do, I can make sure that I can pass the argument from the command line, so that if a user wants to say addition or subtraction, he can pass it as an argument. That means here, when he is invoking the script, he can say like this, right? If he says add, then let me do the addition. And if he says subtract, let us do the subtraction. So that way, by passing the arguments, we will know what he wants to do. That is one way of doing it. So now, if that is the case, then what we need to do is we need to take the argument that whatever he's passing. But first thing what we need to know is we need to validate it and make sure whether he's passing value or not. That is first, right? Because if he is passing no values, then you don't know what to do. So we need him at least to pass one value. That is first thing. And second thing is we need to make sure whatever value he's passing is either add or subtract and nothing else. So what we are trying to do is a validation of the value. Okay, so the first thing what we should do is let us first make sure that he is passing some value. So we need a minimum or a maximum of one value to be passed, because if he passes, right, if he says Perl 5.pl, then it is going to be what? It's going to be either add, or he has to say subtract. So any one of them. So I cannot say both. So it has to be only one value. So for that case, what we have to do is first we need to validate it. So how do you validate? So let us go back to our basics, whatever we learned again. So now Okay, so now I know that $hash of RGV plus 1 will give me the total number of values or the elements that I have passed, right? So now how much this should be? It should always be 1 because it should be either add or subtract, right? So now I can validate if dollar number is not equal to 1. That means if the user is passing either 0 value or more than 1 value, then it is wrong. So I will say print, please enter a value. Okay. Now here, I don't want the user to really proceed further. So that's what we will do is we will simply do a exit and we will come out. Now, what this will do is if the user passes a value and if it is not equal to 1, then it will never allow the user to proceed further because wherever it sees this special function called exit, it will come out of the script. Okay, I'm just going to show you that. So if you see, it will never get this EOS printed because as soon as this line runs, it will exit the script completely. So now if you say add, it is working fine. The same thing, if I don't give a value, see, it says please enter a value and it's just giving a user a information. The same way, if I pass two values, it's still going to say you have given a wrong value, right? So like this, you have to give a proper meaning for whatever that you're writing. So I can just change this. I'll say you need to enter only one value, that is add or subtract. Okay. So now this gives a more meaningful message so that when a user runs, he will be knowing that he has to pass either add or subtract. Now the next one is we need to validate whether it is add or subtract and nothing other than that. So what we can do for that is I can simply write the same. So I can cross check if dollar $RGV of 0, right? So what will this do? This will be what? This is the first variable or the index which is going to store the value of whatever arguments you are passing, right? So if RGV is not equal to what? Add, then what is that you're going to do? I need to check, right? So I need to check whether the value is either add or subtract, then I have to give a error message. So now for now, I have two conditions to check. So there are many ways of doing that, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some simple ones so that you can really understand, not to get into complicated ones. So here, now what I'll do is now when will the Perl go inside this? Only if the value that whatever you are entered is not equal to add. That means if you pass subtract or sub, even then it will go inside it, right? So the next thing what I need to do is I need to validate that also. So inside this, I'll give one more condition. Okay. Now what does this condition say? This condition says that you are not passing the value sub also. So if the argument is not equal to add, and when it comes in, if the value is still not equal to sub, that means the value whatever that you have passed is neither add or subtract, then you will say invalid arguments, please enter either add or subtract. Okay. If not, you exit. So here, now if I run it, see what's going to happen. So if I say add, this is fine. Or if I say subtract, it's going to be fine. And if I say any other value, it's going to say invalid arguments. So like this, now I can cross check that you are passing only one value, and that has to be either add or subtract. Now the next thing what I need to do is we need to add it, right? So how is that you're going to do? Now to add two numbers, I need to take a value from it. So we will write first a subroutine as a common to get the value from the user. So here, the next thing I'll do is subroutine user input. That means I want the user to enter some value. So here I'll say print enter first number, and okay, and to get the value I'll say number one equal to stdin, and we have to chomp it because it's going to contain a special character at the end. So whenever we are receiving the stdin, we saw in the previous class that it's going to store some special character at the end, that is a new line character. So we need to remove it. Then the next thing is we need to take the second number. Okay, and let's change this. Okay, so now here, hmm, what's happening? Okay, so I'm getting two values from the user, right? So once this is done, now I can make sure whether you are going to do either add or subtract. Now how do you do it? Now first thing what we need to do is I'll write a condition if what? If $argv of 0 is equal to add, then what I need to do? Then I need to add, right? So how is that you're going to do that? So for that, I'm just writing a if condition. And first thing to do the addition is I need those two numbers. So here I will call user input. So if I call user input, what will happen? It will call this particular subroutine, and here you will be getting all the values. And once I get the values, then I will say print adding numbers, that is $num1 and $num2. Okay, and here we will say total equal to $num1 plus $num2, and let's say print total equal to $2. Okay, so this is done. So now it will exactly do what? Addition. Now the same thing if you want to do the subtract, that is now I know either value will be add, if not the only option that we have is else it has to be what? Subtract. So now how to do subtract? The same way I need two values for that. So simply I'll say user input, and then we'll just do a subtraction. So print subtracting numbers $num1 and $num2. And how do you subtract? I'll know that total 2 equal to $num1 minus $num2, and let's say total equal to tot2. Okay, so getting the difference. Now the user input subroutine will get called only at this place. So if the value is add, then it will come here and it will call this, wherein you are getting the two values from the user, and then it will proceed with addition or whatever you want to do. In case if it is not add, the next value which is possible is subtract. So then it will go ahead with this, and for this it will first call the subroutine, get the values, and then come here and run the rest. So let us try to practice the same. Okay, now if I say subtract, so it's going to ask first number 10, second number. So subtracting 10 and 2, the total value that you'll get is 8. And if I say add, it's going to add two numbers. Okay, I'm just adding 12 and 33. Then the value of that, the total output is 45. And if I pass any value other than that, it's not going to run, and it's going to give me a error. So even if I say 2 add subtract, it will not do, because we know that the values that we have to pass should be either add or subtract. Getting the difference and how to use exactly subroutine.